The morning of June 10, 1995, dawned with a bright, clear sky over Tokyo, a day promising routine flights and bustling airport terminals. Among the many flights scheduled, United Airlines Flight 811 was preparing for its journey across the Pacific, carrying 418 souls from Tokyo to Honolulu. The passengers on board ranged from vacationers excited for Hawaiian beaches to seasoned business travelers immersed in their schedules. The atmosphere was one of anticipation, an ordinary start to what would become an extraordinary day. Captain Daniel Hayden, a veteran with decades of experience, was in command. His crew, a mix of seasoned aviators and meticulous cabin staff, worked seamlessly to ensure a smooth departure. As the 747 taxied down the runway and lifted into the sky, the gentle hum of the engines was a comforting constant, lulling passengers into naps or drawing them into conversations with fellow travelers. At 10,000 feet, the cabin lights dimmed slightly as the aircraft began its steady ascent toward cruising altitude. What no one could have anticipated was the chain of events about to unfold, events that would push the limits of human skill, determination, and courage. Barely an hour into the flight, cruising at 22,000 feet over the Pacific Ocean, the plane's serenity was shattered by an ear-splitting explosion. One of the aircraft's mighty Pratt and Whitney JT9D engines, massive turbines designed to power the colossal Boeing 747, had catastrophically failed. The sound of the explosion was deafening, reverberating through the cabin and shaking the aircraft violently. Passengers screamed as the plane lurched to the side, the unbalanced thrust creating an agonizing tilt. The cabin erupted into chaos. Oxygen masks deployed, and passengers scrambled to grab them as the rapid decompression caused ears to pop and hearts to pound. Outside the windows, the once pristine white engine nacelle was now a blackened, shredded mess. Flames and smoke trailed ominously from the damaged engine, creating a nightmarish contrast against the vast blue sky and ocean below. In the cockpit, alarms blared incessantly, filling the confined space with piercing sounds that demanded immediate action. Captain Hayden and his crew fought against the overwhelming flood of warnings and flashing lights. The aircraft's control systems were still functional, but the situation was rapidly deteriorating. A quick glance confirmed their worst fear. The No. 3 engine, located on the right wing, had suffered a catastrophic uncontained failure, sending debris hurtling through the plane's structure. To make matters worse, the explosion had severely damaged critical hydraulic systems, compromising their ability to control the aircraft. It also triggered cascading issues with the remaining engines, placing the entire flight at risk. "We've lost an engine," Captain Hayden said, his voice steady but tense. "And we're losing pressure. Descend immediately." First Officer Ryan Lambert and Flight Engineer Jessica Park moved swiftly, their hands flying across the instrument panel as they followed emergency protocols. Hayden declared a mayday to air traffic control, his voice calm but clipped, as he relayed their position and condition. United 811, declaring an emergency. Engine failure, possible structural damage. Request immediate diversion to Honolulu. The response from the controller came quickly. Roger, United 811. You are cleared to descend. Maintain communication. But as the plane began its emergency descent, another realization dawned on the crew: they might not make it to Honolulu. The nearest airport was still hundreds of miles away, and the compromised aircraft was losing altitude faster than anticipated. A chilling question loomed unspoken in the cockpit: would they reach land at all? In the cabin, flight attendants sprang into action, moving through the aisles to calm passengers and ensure everyone was secure. Panic was palpable, tears streamed down faces, prayers were whispered, and hands clutched tightly to armrests and each other. Amid the chaos, the professionalism of the crew stood out as a beacon of hope. Despite the grave circumstances, Captain Hayden maintained his composure, analyzing his dwindling options. The Boeing 747's operating manual was clear: an engine failure required adherence to strict emergency protocols. But as the situation worsened, Hayden realized that following the rules to the letter might not be enough to save the aircraft. It was a moment that would define his career, a choice between protocol and survival. As smoke billowed from the crippled engine and vibrations rippled through the plane, Hayden gripped the yoke with a determination forged over decades of flying. He glanced at his crew, then back at the roaring sea below. The odds were stacked against them, but one thought drove him forward: 418 lives are counting on us to make it through this. In the next few minutes, Hayden would face the most critical decisions of his life, choices that would defy conventional procedures but offer a glimmer of hope in the face of disaster. The Boeing 747 groaned under the stress as Captain Daniel Hayden and his crew battled to stabilize the stricken aircraft. The uncontained engine failure had ripped through more than just the engine casing. Shrapnel had punctured the fuselage and torn through hydraulic lines, severely impacting the plane's control systems. At cruising altitude, even a small miscalculation could mean disaster, and now Hayden was flying an aircraft teetering on the edge of complete failure. As the emergency descent continued, the severity of the situation became evident to everyone on board. The damaged engine wasn't just dead, it was becoming a growing hazard. Debris lodged in the structure was causing drag, pulling the aircraft further to the right, making it harder for Hayden to maintain control. Every adjustment to the yoke required near superhuman strength, as the plane bucked against his commands. "We're fighting her all the way down," Hayden muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. The cockpit crew worked like clockwork, balancing urgency with precision. Flight engineer Jessica Park read out vital statistics: altitude, airspeed, and engine performance, while First Officer Ryan Lambert focused on navigation. With Honolulu still over 300 miles away, Hayden faced a chilling realization: the Boeing 747 might not have the structural integrity to survive the journey. The thought of ditching into the Pacific Ocean loomed large, a scenario every pilot dreads. Yet, even as the enormity of the situation pressed down on him, Hayden refused to give up. In the passenger cabin, the atmosphere was tense but calmer than before. Flight attendants had moved quickly to reassure passengers, though their own fear was evident in their strained smiles and trembling hands. Families huddled together, whispering words of comfort and hope. Some passengers began writing notes to loved ones, their trembling hands scribbling on scraps of paper or airline napkins, in case the worst should happen. A mother held her young child close, whispering promises she hoped she could keep. Amid this tension, an announcement from the cockpit crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Hayden. We have experienced an engine failure and are currently diverting to Honolulu. I assure you, my crew and I are doing everything we can to get you there safely. Please remain seated and follow the instructions of the flight attendants. We will keep you updated." His steady tone brought a measure of comfort, though the unspoken reality lingered: they were still far from safety. Hayden faced a monumental challenge. The crippled aircraft required a delicate balance of power. The 3 remaining engines were operational, but uneven thrust from the damaged wing made the plane dangerously unstable. Standard procedures dictated shutting down the damaged engine entirely, but this would increase drag and potentially compromise their ability to reach Honolulu. Breaking protocol, Hayden made a bold decision: to leave the damaged engine at idle, despite the risks, in an attempt to stabilize the plane. It was a gamble, one that went against years of drilled-in procedures. But Hayden knew that strict adherence to the rules might seal their fate. With every second, his decisions grew more daring. He ordered Lambert to modify their descent trajectory, opting for a slower descent to conserve fuel and buy precious time. "We don't make land if we run out of fuel first," Hayden remarked grimly. In the cabin, passengers could feel every shudder and vibration as the plane limped toward its destination. Some pressed their faces against the windows, searching the vast expanse of ocean for a glimpse of land, but all they saw was endless blue. For others, time seemed to stretch interminably, every minute an agonizing wait for news. Back in the cockpit, Hayden and his team worked relentlessly, navigating a series of increasingly desperate scenarios. The turbulence worsened, rattling the plane as it fought against the Pacific winds. Then, a new alarm blared, a temperature spike in one of the remaining engines. Another engine failure at this point would mean certain disaster. "We're running out of options here," Lambert said, his voice tight with tension. Hayden's response was calm but firm. "We still have a shot. Keep her steady." With a mix of skill and instinct, he adjusted power levels on the remaining engines, redistributing thrust to ease the strain on the failing system. Every adjustment carried risk, but Hayden's experience allowed him to make split-second decisions with unwavering focus. Finally, a voice crackled over the radio: Honolulu Air Traffic Control. They had received the mayday and were coordinating an emergency landing. A runway was cleared, emergency crews were on standby, and radar contact was established. Relief surged through the cockpit, but the hardest part was still ahead: landing a compromised 747, heavy with fuel, on a runway built for perfection, not emergencies. As the hours crawled by, the outline of Oahu appeared on the horizon, a glimmer of hope against the unrelenting ocean. The sight sent a wave of relief through the cabin. Passengers clung to each other, tears of gratitude welling up as the promise of survival grew closer. But for Hayden and his crew, the battle was far from over. The landing itself would be a trial of precision and courage, a chance to save lives but also the potential for catastrophic failure. With Oahu now visible, Hayden turned to his crew. "This is it," he said, his voice steady despite the tension that gripped the cockpit. "We bring her home, or we don't make it. Let's finish this." As the 747 began its final approach, every soul aboard braced for the landing of a lifetime. The island of Oahu loomed larger in the windshield as United Airlines Flight 811 descended through the clouds. The final approach was fraught with challenges. Captain Hayden's years of experience had prepared him for many scenarios, but nothing like this. The Boeing 747, with its damaged engine and compromised hydraulic systems, was barely holding together. Every vibration, every shuddering lurch of the plane, was a grim reminder of how much was at stake. Despite the tension in the cockpit, the crew worked with meticulous focus. Flight engineer Jessica Park continuously monitored engine temperatures, fuel flow, and hydraulic pressure, her eyes darting between flickering gauges. First Officer Lambert assisted Hayden in managing the descent, relaying airspeed and altitude updates as they approached Honolulu's Daniel K. Inouye International Airport. On the radio, Air Traffic Control provided landing clearance and updates on weather conditions. Emergency crews were already stationed along the runway, prepared for the worst-case scenario. Yet, the challenges were mounting. The compromised hydraulics had made the landing gear sluggish, and though it finally deployed, the indicators showed potential instability in one of the wheels. Hayden's heart sank, but he kept his focus on the task at hand. Adding to the difficulty was the plane's weight. It was still loaded with fuel for the trans-Pacific journey. A landing at this weight carried the risk of the landing gear collapsing or the tires bursting, either of which could spell disaster. "Captain, we're heavy," Lambert noted, stating the obvious. "If we hit too hard—" "I know," Hayden interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "We'll hit just hard enough to survive." In the cabin, the atmosphere was a mix of tension and quiet resolve. Passengers clutched their oxygen masks, some still crying, others staring ahead with blank expressions. The flight attendants made their final rounds, ensuring everyone was in brace position. "Heads down, stay down," they repeated, their voices steady despite the fear in their eyes. The sound of the engines and the rush of air outside the fuselage filled the cabin, a relentless reminder of their precarious situation. The passengers weren't the only ones bracing for impact. Hayden knew that landing the plane was going to require every ounce of skill, composure, and nerve he possessed. The 747 was listing slightly to the right due to the uneven thrust from the damaged engine. The plane also required constant manual corrections to keep it aligned with the runway. Hayden gripped the yoke tightly, his knuckles white. The margin for error was razor thin. As the aircraft approached the runway, Hayden's focus narrowed. The shimmering black strip of asphalt below was the only thing that mattered now. "Flaps to 30, he instructed. The damaged hydraulic system strained to comply, but the flaps eventually extended. The plane's descent slowed slightly, but it was still coming in faster than ideal. "Hold it steady," Hayden muttered, his voice barely audible over the roar of the engines. At 500 feet, the alarms in the cockpit were relentless, a cacophony of warnings about speed, altitude, and structural integrity. But Hayden blocked it all out. His focus was absolute. "Gears down and locked," Lambert confirmed, his voice tense. "All yours, Captain." At 100 feet, the runway lights blurred into a streak beneath them. The tension in the cabin reached its peak. Passengers squeezed their eyes shut or gripped their armrests with white-knuckled hands. The flight attendants braced themselves, silently praying. "Brace! Brace!" a flight attendant shouted, the command echoing through the cabin as the aircraft hurtled toward the ground. Then, with a deafening roar, the plane's landing gear touched down. The initial impact was hard, the 747 bouncing slightly before Hayden forced it back down. Tires screeched and smoke billowed as the massive plane skidded along the runway, its brakes straining under the weight and speed. Hayden deployed the reverse thrusters, pushing the engines to their limit in an effort to slow the aircraft. In the cockpit, the tension was palpable as the plane roared down the runway. "Come on, come on!" Hayden muttered, his hands steady on the controls as he fought to keep the plane aligned. The end of the runway approached rapidly, but finally, the aircraft began to slow. The screeching of tires and the roar of the engines gradually diminished. When the plane came to a halt, there was a moment of stunned silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved or spoke. Then a wave of cheers and applause erupted in the cabin, tears streaming down faces as passengers realized they were alive. Hayden let out a long, shaky breath, his hands trembling slightly as he released the controls. In the cockpit, Lambert turned to Hayden, a look of disbelief and admiration on his face. "You did it," he said simply. Hayden nodded, his expression weary but resolute. Emergency crews surrounded the plane within moments, ready to assist with evacuations. The passengers were ushered off the aircraft as quickly as possible, many of them embracing the ground with tears of relief. News of the incident spread rapidly, and soon the world would learn about the extraordinary skill and courage that had saved 418 lives. But for Captain Daniel Hayden, the moment was not about heroics. It was about fulfilling the sacred trust every pilot carries, the responsibility to bring everyone home, no matter the odds. As he stepped off the plane, exhausted but triumphant, he glanced back at the aircraft, battered but intact, and whispered, "We made it." The aftermath of United Airlines Flight 811's emergency landing was a whirlwind of emotions, investigations, and media attention. For the passengers and crew, the relief of survival was overwhelming. As they stood on the tarmac, some still trembling, others embracing loved ones or rescuers, the full gravity of what they had endured began to sink in. There had been no guarantee they would see land again, let alone walk away from such a catastrophic failure. Emergency responders moved quickly, ensuring that all 418 passengers and crew were accounted for and assessing for injuries. Miraculously, only a few minor injuries were reported, sprains and bruises from the rough landing, but nothing life-threatening. For many, the physical injuries were far outweighed by the emotional toll. Passengers recounted how they had prepared themselves for the worst, writing final messages to loved ones or clutching keepsakes they thought might be all that remained of their legacy. Captain Hayden and his crew were immediately hailed as heroes. The audacious decisions they made during the flight, to break protocol, to push the limits of the aircraft, and to remain calm under immense pressure, were credited with saving everyone on board. Aviation experts praised Hayden's masterful handling of the 747, likening it to threading a needle in the middle of a storm. "He didn't just fly the plane," one expert remarked. "He fought it all the way down and won." But for Hayden, the aftermath brought mixed emotions. As he faced the cameras and microphones of reporters eager for a soundbite, he deflected the praise toward his crew. "This was a team effort," he insisted. "Jessica and Ryan in the cockpit, the flight attendants in the cabin, they're the real heroes. They stayed calm and did their jobs when it mattered most." Behind the scenes, the investigation into the incident was already underway. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, and United Airlines launched a comprehensive review of what had caused the catastrophic engine failure. Initial inspections of the wrecked engine revealed evidence of metal fatigue, a hidden flaw in one of the turbine blades that had gone undetected during routine maintenance. The blade had fractured mid-flight, triggering a chain reaction that tore through the engine casing and damaged the plane's hydraulic systems. The investigation also uncovered a chilling fact. The engine's failure had narrowly avoided severing critical control lines that would have rendered the plane uncontrollable. The outcome could have been far worse if not for a combination of sheer luck and Captain Hayden's extraordinary skill. The findings sent shockwaves through the aviation industry, prompting immediate changes to inspection protocols for similar engines. Airlines around the world grounded aircraft to perform detailed inspections, and manufacturers revised their maintenance guidelines to prevent a repeat of the disaster. The incident became a stark reminder of the fragility of even the most advanced technology, and the importance of constant vigilance in aviation safety. For the passengers of Flight 811, the experience left an indelible mark. Many formed lasting bonds, united by the shared trauma of that fateful day. They organized reunions and stayed in touch, supporting each other as they processed what they had been through. Some spoke openly about how the incident had changed their perspective on life, driving them to cherish their loved ones and seize opportunities they might have otherwise overlooked. One passenger, a young woman who had been traveling to Hawaii for her honeymoon, recalled how she had scribbled a final message to her husband during the flight's darkest moments. "I thought I'd never see him again," she said tearfully during an interview. "But now, every day feels like a gift. I'll never take it for granted." As for Captain Hayden, the incident became a defining moment in his career. Though he was celebrated as a hero, he remained humble, insisting that he had simply done his job. He continued flying for several years before retiring, his legacy firmly cemented in aviation history. In interviews, he often reflected on the lessons of Flight 811, emphasizing the importance of preparation, teamwork, and staying calm under pressure. "Every pilot hopes they'll never face a situation like that," he once said. "But if it happens, you rely on your training and your crew. And you never, ever give up." United Airlines Flight 811 became more than just a story of survival. It became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of decisive action in the face of overwhelming odds. Though the events of that day left scars, they also inspired change, ensuring that the skies would be safer for future generations. In the years that followed, aviation safety standards continued to evolve, shaped by the lessons learned from incidents like Flight 811. And while the passengers and crew would always carry the memory of those harrowing hours over the Pacific, they also carried something else, a deep appreciation for life, and the knowledge that even in the darkest moments, hope can endure.